All right, class, let's start off with our chapter 2, Chemistry of Life. All right, so we talked about a little bit about the organization of life in the last chapter. Sorry about this lamp and everything over here. I know it's kind of loud, but I'll try to speak loud. Nude is an animal. Leaves, the leaves, the air are all forms of matter, right? Everything, the table that you're writing on, this screen and the computer, all that is matter. Matter makes up every object, consists of one or more elements organized into atoms and molecules. And so sort of starting off at the smallest level, which we talked about last time a little bit, the atoms, the molecules, the combinations of atoms together is what make up what is known as matter. And we want to study life at the microscopic level, at the smallest level, and then all the way, as you noticed from the last lecture, to the cell, to the tissue, to the organ systems, to the populations. We want to to the biosphere, to the whole Earth. We want to study it at all the different levels because, depending on how we look at it, we can discover different things, right? So, an element is a substance that cannot be broken down by chemical means into other substances. For instance, oxygen is considered an element. Carbon, an element. Sulfur, an element. Hydrogen, that you studied today, is an element, all right? Living things such as the newt, the animal here, and the plant are mostly composed of 6 elements, all right? So these are the most common elements you'll find not only in the world, but in our bodies, all right? Carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen are the most common. The first 4 and then the next 2 are also very common in our bodies and in the world around us. All right. If you look at the soil of the ground, you'll find carbon. If you look in your body, you'll find carbon. For instance, very common element in the body. All right. We put all the elements together in what is known as a periodic table. There's not one. Sometimes they're on display in some of the chemistry classrooms. But we put all the elements together on what is called a periodic table. All right, so hydrogen you discussed today, or you researched today. It has a 1, which is its atomic number. So only hydrogen has the atomic number of 1. It means it has 1 proton, all right? Carbon, which is very prevalent in your bodies, has an atomic number of 6. Oxygen has an atomic number of 8. And you see, based on the atomic number, we can organize the different elements that we find here in the world. All right? Bulk elements, the dark blue ones, are the ones that are most common. The ones that are light blue are common but less abundant, and the ones that are green are trace elements, right? Not as common, but we do find them in the body. And then the ones that are white are we don't generally find in the body unless you put them in artificially, like silicone. All right. Each box shows 1 element, including the element's full name. Carbon is for example, its full name, and the element's 1 or 2 letter symbol. The symbol for carbon is C. Atomic number is 6. Atomic weight is 12. It has 6 protons, 6 neutrons, gives it an atomic weight of 12. We'll discuss those We'll discuss those very soon. All right. Protons, neutrons, electrons, you see those there? That's gonna, as we study those, we'll be able to better understand what these numbers mean. Right? So this is an atom. right? We mentioned the atom last week, the smallest piece of an element that retains the characteristics of that element. What's the smallest unit that has the characteristics of a living being? A cell, correct. So the atom, so an atom is the smallest piece of an element that retains the characteristics of that element. Is an atom considered alive? No. Is oxygen considered alive?
Oxygen is in our body, right?
How do we determine if something is alive?
You said if it needs sun.
We talked about this last week.
You said if it needs sunlight, like for instance, so the table doesn't need it because it's, well, when it was a tree, something to stay alive because it needed.
It needs energy.
Energy.
Energy. That's one of the reasons. Movement is another reason. Reproduction is another sign of life. All right. Can this table reproduce? No. Does this table need energy? No. Organized, yeah. Now the table is organized. The structure of the table is organized, but it can't reproduce. It can't move on its own. It doesn't require energy. So we would not consider it to be alive. Oxygen, yes, we need it for life, but oxygen in and of itself is not considered alive. Okay? An atom is composed of 3 smaller particles, right? Protons, neutrons, and electrons make up atoms, right? We generally don't go smaller than that, but anything can be cut in half and cut in half and cut in half and go smaller and smaller, but generally we do not. There is science that goes smaller than the protons, neutrons, and electrons, but into the subatomic particles, but we generally don't go smaller than this, all right? Because we generally start at the atom. That's the smallest unit that retains the properties of that element, all right? And the structure of the atom is the protons, neutrons, and electrons, all right? So electrons surround the atomic molecule and they're moving very fast. There's these particles here, electrons. Protons and neutrons are closed together in the atomic nucleus. So electrons are going very fast around, electrons are going very fast around it, protons and neutrons in the middle. So carbon, which is atomic number 6, has 6 protons and 6 neutrons in the nucleus, and then it has 6 electrons swirling around, balancing out those protons. Because electrons have a negative charge, protons have a positive charge. All right? So the protons and neutrons close together in an atomic nucleus, that's what gives it the weight, that atomic weight, atomic mass. Protons are positively charged. Neutrons are neutral, neutral, makes sense. And electrons are negatively charged. All right, so generally, not all the time, the electrons and the protons balance out so that you have a net charge of 0, right? Now, sometimes you'll have a difference in the amount of electrons and protons, and so you'll have a charged atom, which we call an ion. You may have heard that before, which will later on in the chapter. All right, so carbon has 6. The atomic number is 6 you see on carbon when you look at the periodic table. That means it has 6 protons. It also has 6 electrons. Its atomic weight is 12, which means it has 6 neutrons as well, and that's what gives it its atomic weight.
So the same, that number means the balanced number of neutrons. It has a balance of neutrons and electrons.
Generally, yes. Yes, in its most stable form. The mass number is the total number of protons and neutrons. Mass number of carbon is 12. 6 plus 6 is 12. Number of protons plus number of neutrons, right? Number of neutrons can also vary, all right? When that happens, we call it an isotope, right? So carbon, most carbon has 6 protons, 6 neutrons, 6 electrons. That's 99% of the carbon atoms. But carbon 13 have 7 neutrons, so 1 neutron heavier, or carbon-14, and these two are generally unstable, could have as many as 8 neutrons. All right? Those are called isotopes. So this is all considered carbon, but the 13 and the 14 are considered isotopes. Same number of protons and neutrons, but a different number, protons and electrons, but a different number of neutrons. That's considered an isotope. Isotope. So you'll see that word. Isotopes have a different mass because the number of neutrons is different. All right? All right, so carbon's atomic weight is close to 12, but some carbons have an isotope. Oh, hold on.
Sorry to bother you, but
Yeah.
Lisa, do you mind just emailing her with your J number so she can add that whenever you get a chance, okay? So she can give you the access for the room.
Oh, okay.
Rita downstairs with the J number. Your J
Oh,
number.
email Rita. Okay.
Yes.
And I'm
Okay.
here because there were complaints about the fish tank being loud. Is it bothering you?
It is kind of loud.
I'm just,
But I don't know if I don't know if you can do anything
I
about
don't
it.
know if I can do anything. He said he was sitting around.
Oh, okay. Is that what it was?
Solomon's.
Oh, okay. If so, yeah, but if not, we'll make do. All right, so because 99% of carbon has a mass number of 12, it's pretty close to 12 the atomic weight, but since some carbon does have 13 or 14 as their mass number, you see the number is slightly above 12, 12.012. All right, so that's a question in regards to that. The atomic weight of nitrogen is very near 14, indicating that most nitrogen atoms have a mass number of 14. How many neutrons does the average nitrogen atom have? All right, so if the number is 7 up top and the mass number is 14, that means you have 7 protons. To get the 14, you would have to have 7 neutrons. So the correct answer would be B. Ah, look at that. The professor knows a few things. All right. Chemical bonds. All right, chemical bonds. So once we understand the concept of elements and atoms, how do different atoms bond together? How do they start bonding together? All right, because most things are not just one element, all right? Your table is made up of different types of elements. Your body is made up of many different types of elements, all right? How do they come together to make an atom? To make a molecule and eventually make a cell and tissues and all the other things that are made up of elements, all right? So this is talking about that, different ways that elements bond. So in this case, it's talking about the water molecule. And one of the ways, if you've ever noticed when you put water on a drop of water on the table, it doesn't just lay flat, but a drop of water has a slight curve to it. If you ever look at like just a single drop of water on the table, there's something that is happening to that water to where it's causing it to have that slight curve. Not all fluids do that. Water has what is called a hydrogen bond, right? So each of these water molecules is a composite of 2 hydrogen atoms and 1 oxygen atom, and the negative charge of the oxygen atom and the positive charge of the hydrogen atom have a connection. Opposites attract. And so that forms what is called a hydrogen bond. All right, here we have different ways to determine chemical bonding, the number and distribution of electrons around an atom, right? We talked about protons and neutrons are in the nucleus of the different atoms, but then you have electrons that are spinning around. Remember, the protons positively charged, electrons negatively charged, but it's the electrons that really play a significant role in one atom bonding with another atom. Okay?
Is that the energy? Is that the energy part? The electrons, since it's moving around photons.
Is it the
The energy.
Energy of what? Like what energy?
What makes it react or
The bonding, the bonds, so a reaction happens when bonds are broken or bonds are formed. There's a reaction happening. Okay? We'll see that. All right, so energy shells is the name, or orbitals contain the atom's electrons. These shells exist at various distances from the atom. Farthest away from the nucleus is important. The shell farthest away from the nucleus is important for bonding. So whatever the outer shell is for each, so for the hydrogen, there's just one. For the carbon, the outer shell contains 4. For the nitrogen, the outer shell contains also 5. Oxygen, the outer shell is 6, and so on and so forth. And that outer shell is going to determine bonding. So unpaired electrons form bonds with other atoms. Atoms are most stable when their outer shells have no vacancies, right? Vacancies make them less stable and more likely to bond with other atoms, right? So it sounds kind of confusing, but it's actually very simple. So hydrogen, the outer shell, as you see, the first shell for each of these contains two electrons. So hydrogen only has 1 electron, so it has a vacancy of 1. All of these other ones in their first outer shell contain 2. In their first shell contain 2. That's the way they want to be. Carbon, for instance, has 4 in its outer shell. That second shell, as you see in carbon, nitrogen, and oxygen, that second shell wants to have 8 electrons, right? So carbon actually has 4 vacancies, those open circles. Nitrogen has 3, oxygen has 2 vacancies, all right? Those are vacancies that want to be filled, right? So the idea when you make something called methane, which is carbon binding with 4 hydrogens, what is happening is that a hydrogen with its single outer electron is going to share with a carbon's single outer electron. So this electron would fill this gap and this electron would fill that gap, and they would share. Same thing would happen here with another hydrogen. Same thing would happen here with another hydrogen. Same thing would happen here with another hydrogen. So carbon would bind to 4 different hydrogens and share the electron with those 4 hydrogens to make what is called methane, CH4, right? That's kind of what's happening. H2O. Everybody knows what H2O is, right? Water, all right? What is it chemically, all right? So what is happening? Hydrogen, which has 1 electron in its outer shell, but wants to have 2 so that shell is full. Oxygen has 2 openings. Look at that, H2O, right? Has 2 openings that want to be filled. Hydrogen has 1 opening, 1 electron to donate, to share, and 1 opening that wants to be filled. So when you make H2O, water, what is happening is this hydrogen, this electron is filling that gap, that electron is filling this gap, they share. That would be H1. H2 comes from another hydrogen binding to that, fulfilling that gap, and them sharing that electron with the hydrogen and with the oxygen. So they'll be bound. H2, and then you have 1 oxygen that's able to bind to 2 other hydrogen, and that's how you get water, H2O. All right, so that's what's happening, right? Does that make sense? Any questions? All right. All right, so this is just showing it to you in a nice diagram that I just explained. So that's making 1 molecule of methane. right? So carbon has 4 openings, hydrogen has four hydrogens, which will give you 4 openings and 4 electrons to share, and they all bind together, form that connection to where now they're sharing those electrons, fulfilling those gaps, and now we have a much more stable outer energy shell, and therefore we have this methane molecule, CH4. When atoms share electrons, it's called a covalent bond, All right, they're sharing those electrons. So you're giving me an electron to fill my outer shell, I'm giving you an electron to fill your outer shell, and so those electrons are being shared by both of us, by in this case, the hydrogen and the carbon. Those electrons are being shared, and therefore each element has its outer shell fulfilled. And you've created a new chemical, right? Or a new, not created new, not new, but a different one. So this is methane, which is not carbon and it's not hydrogen. It's CH4, carbon and hydrogen bound together. A chemical reaction has happened and you've created something different. Same thing with water. Oxygen, gas, hydrogen, gas, H2O is water. Obviously, it's a liquid, right? You've had a chemical reaction, and now the hydrogen is sharing its electron with the oxygen. The other hydrogen is sharing its electron with the oxygen. They bound together. A chemical reaction has formed. They formed a new molecule called water. All right? Different from hydrogen or oxygen. All right, you can have double covalent bonds. All right, in the case of oxygen binding to oxygen, right? And this is generally how oxygen floats around in the air. It actually floats around. A lot of the oxygen we breathe is actually O2. Which is an oxygen bound to another oxygen molecule, and it still floats around. That's how it floats around in the air, because it's more stable that way, right? They both have 2 openings that need to be filled, and so they both want to bind these 2, bind those 2, and share, right? Covalent bond, oxygen gas. Water, I've already mentioned that. Water is formed by covalent bonds. Oxygen, 8 protons, 8 electrons. Hydrogen, 1 proton, 1 electron, binding to each other, covalent bonding, right? Forming what is called a water molecule, H2O. All right, 2 single covalent bonds, a single bond here and a single bond there, right? All right, electronegativity measures an atom's ability to attract electrons, all right? So, still considered a covalent bond. A covalent bond, but they have different electronegativities. What does that mean? All right, so in methane, the carbon and the hydrogen equally share the electrons, all right? We're sharing. They spend an equal amount of time around the carbon and an equal amount of time around the hydrogen. And they're, moving around very fast. In water, which I kind of mentioned earlier, but in water, H2O, the oxygen atom pulls the electrons that are supposed to be being shared between the oxygen and the hydrogen. The oxygen is pulling those electrons a little more closer, so it's kind of being greedy, but the electrons are spending a little more time towards the oxygen than they are towards the hydrogen. That is what we are referring to when we're talking about electronegativity, and this is important for different reasons. All right, so because the oxygen is able to pull the shared electrons more towards the oxygen atom, they spend less time around the hydrogen atom than they do the oxygen atom. And so the oxygen tends to have a more of a negative charge and the hydrogen more of a positive charge. Electronegativity differences can determine different types of chemical bonds, right? So in the case of water, it's considered a polar covalent bond, still covalent because they're sharing the electrons, but it's polar in that the electrons are spending a little more time towards one than the other. They're still being shared, but they spend more time around the oxygen than they do the hydrogen. Therefore, it's called a polar covalent bond. Shared, but a little uneven. Non-polar covalent bond means equally shared, right? There's no positive or negative charge on the carbon or the hydrogen. So equally shared is a non-polar covalent bond. But then we also have what is called an ionic bond, right? So if non-polar covalent bond is on one end, polar covalent bond is in the middle, ionic bond is on the other end. That means one has a much higher electronegativity than the other, and it basically has pulled the other electron basically completely away from the other element, all right? And so that is considered an ionic bond. So this, in this case, chlorine, sodium, what does this make? Does anybody know? Probably, no, not tear gas. This is something that you probably had today. Salt, correct. Salt, NaCl. Na, sodium, Cl, chlorine. NaCl is salt, all right? Salt. And so what is happening when you have salt? The chlorine ion has a much higher electronegativity, so it literally can pull an ion away, an electron away from the sodium, and therefore, because it has removed an electron from the sodium, now the sodium has a positive charge because it has one more proton than electrons. The chlorine has a negative charge because it has one more electron than protons. And so this has a positive charge, this has a negative charge, and that positive and negative now attract each other, and that makes an ionic bond. Okay? So that's how electronegativity can play a role in how different things bind together. Yes?
All right, so if I'm understanding correctly, so our ionic bond, it takes the electron, making it negative, making the
Chlorine.
chlorine negative.
Mm-hmm.
The sodium was already positive.
No.
No, because it took the electron.
It took the electron and made it positive.
And then for the polar covalent bond,
Mm-hmm.
for that they're just sharing the electrons, right?
They're sharing them, but the electrons are spending more time around the oxygen
Okay.
than they are around the hydrogen.
Non-polar is just equal
It's
around.
equal. Correct. Anyone else? All right, got it. And so looking at some of the key elements, we can see how electronegativity, much lower on this end, much higher on this end, right? Chlorine here, sodium, Na here. So NaCl, when they combine, lead to an ionic bond, okay? Versus carbon here and hydrogen here, not as big of a difference, 2.6, 2.2, so more of a non-polar covalent bond. Oxygen here, hydrogen here, 3.4 to 2.2, right? When they bond, water, they make water, it is a polar covalent bond, okay? Okay, so the difference in electronegativities can give us insight in, is it going to be a non-polar covalent bond, polar covalent bond, or an ionic bond? All right, that's why we study electronegativity. That's one of the reasons why we study the electronegativity. Some are similar. Electronegativities, carbon, hydrogen. Neither pulls more strongly than the other. Non-polar covalent bonds. In that case, oxygen and hydrogen form a water molecule. Just talked about that. Gives off a partial charge because an oxygen now has a negative charge because it's a polar covalent bond. Hydrogen has a little bit of a positive charge because it's a polar covalent bond. Water is held together by these polar covalent bonds. This type of bond forms when atoms have different electronegativities. Just talked about that. Now, back to that diagram that we originally mentioned earlier. Because of the polar covalent bond that happens in water, you do get this slightly positively charged hydrogen, negatively charged oxygen because it's a polar covalent bond. The electrons are spending more time around the oxygen, and there is an extra, this is a water molecule, but there's an extra bond between the water molecules because of that positive and the negative, and that's what's called a hydrogen bond, right? So not only do you have the polar covalent bond between the inside the one oxygen, inside each water molecule, the hydrogen and the oxygen of each water molecule, but you also have the hydrogen bond between separate water molecules because of the slightly positive hydrogen, slightly negative oxygen. Hydrogen bonds give water some of its properties, which are very important in protein and DNA structure. Another reason why when you increase the pH, proteins denature because it can break the hydrogen bond. Think about that. Hydrogen bonds. If I add more hydrogens, increase the pH, can cause those bonds to be not as prevalent because now you have extra hydrogens. You've increased the pH. Therefore, those bonds help give that protein its shape. The protein needs its shape to be able to function. If I increase the pH, change the shape, now it can't function. Right? Because I've increased all the amount of hydrogen ions. I've introduced them into this, I think it says the cytoplasm in your labs. Time's flying today. Jeez. Oh man. All right, so very high electronegativity forms ionic bonds. I already talked about that. They can completely transfer. That's what's happening. The atom loses an electron, becomes positively charged. The atom that gains the electron becomes negatively charged. Now you have a negative and a positive bind together, ionic bond. Atoms with ionic bonds become stable. We talked about, already mentioned NaCl, salt, become very stable. If you take salt, leave it on the table, don't touch it. Today, you come back next week, it'll still be salt. All right, very stable. All right, so this is talking about the different bonds that we just talked about. Ionic bond, covalent, nonpolar, polar, and then also the hydrogen bond. All right, and their strengths. I don't have time for questions right now. All right, water is essential to life, right? Notice in the essential elements that we talked about, carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, sulfur, phosphorus, those ones that are most common. Notice hydrogen, oxygen, hydrogen, oxygen, hydrogen, oxygen, make up water. Water make up our bodies. Very common in life, very important, right? The hydrogen bonds that hold water molecules together give water this unique properties and make it essential for all life. Everybody needs water. All right, so water has the ability to have cohesion, tendency of water molecules to stick to one another. All right. Gives it a high surface tension. That's because of the hydrogen bonds in water, and that's why this whatever that is, praying mantis or whatever I don't know what it is, can stand on top of the water like that. It's pretty cool. Huh? Water bug. I think there's a more biological name for it.
Probably.
I can't remember though.
I think that's that like bug that literally does like
Step on the walk on water. Yeah, that's pretty cool. I wish I could, walk on. Well, somebody has done it before, but
that uses the water tension to its advantage as well. It's called a like bell spider or something.
okay.
It makes a web and using the water tension, it creates like a little air bubble underwater.
That's pretty cool. Pretty cool stuff, yeah. Water evaporates through the pores and leaves. Evaporating molecules pull water up the stem, while the molecules are pulled into the roots, right? Due to the hydrogen bond and water having a connection to the water, it gives it this adhesion property, allows it to be able to sort of adhere to itself, so to speak, so that it can move. Water is an excellent solvent. Sometimes you'll see the term universal solvent, which is not true, but very close to being true. Like a lot of things will dissolve in water. Not everything. Obviously, oil doesn't dissolve in water, but a lot of things will dissolve in water, which is very good for your body. Your bloodstream is made up of about 55% plasma, blood plasma. If you've ever, I'm sure people hopefully know what plasma is in your bloodstream, even if you may not have studied in class. But about 55% of your blood is made up of blood plasma. Blood plasma is primarily made up of water. Why is that important? Because things like hormones can dissolve into your blood plasma, and then as your heart is pumping, those hormones are transported to through your body to where they need to go. All right? So you have some hormones that dissolve right into your blood plasma and some that don't. All right? So it can be very important for your body to be able to function properly. So the fact that things can dissolve in water is very good. Also, all of the cells in your body create waste, right? All the cells in your body. If you use energy, another sign of life, and reason why we know the table is not alive, is because it doesn't make any waste. It doesn't secrete anything, right? If it never secretes anything, it never makes any waste, it's not considered to be alive, right? The cells in your body make waste. That waste has to go somewhere. Where does it go? It goes to your bloodstream, right? How does that waste get transported to your kidneys so that you can excrete it out of your body? Or in the case of bowel movements, the food that you eat that doesn't get digested moves through your bowels, but the things that your cells the waste that your cells create generally goes through your bloodstream to your kidneys, which the kidneys filter out your blood, and then you urinate. How can it do that? Because the waste created by your cells can dissolve into your blood plasma till it gets to your kidneys, and then it can, by the process of diffusion, diffuse out of the kidneys and become what is called urine.
So how do things that can't dissolve in water also get secreted out of your body?
It depends. All right. So not everything dissolves. There are transport mechanisms. So you have, we talked about today, albumin, for instance, that protein that we discussed today in the lab. Some proteins can transport certain substances in your body that don't dissolve in water because the proteins are inside your blood plasma and are transported through your blood but don't necessarily dissolve in water. Well, then things can connect to that protein, be transported through your blood that way, and still diffuse when it gets to the proper location. All right?
So because of all that transportation with the plasma, that's why you can still have the feeling that you need to use the bathroom although you haven't drink water?
So class, we continuing on
with chapter 2 and the unique properties of water, water also has the ability to be an excellent solvent. All right. So in this case, solvent dissolving salt, which we talked about in class, but water has, because of its polar covalent bonds, has a slightly negative charge on the oxygen, slightly positive charge on those hydrogens. And so even though it's covalent, it's polar covalent. And so when salt, NaCl, Na positive, Cl negative, dissolves in water, you notice that the sodium is attracted to the positive, is attracted to the negative charge of the hydrogen ions, and then the chlorine is attracted to the positive charge of the hydrogen ions. And so we have that with our water, whereas certain certain things don't dissolve in water. Everybody knows oil doesn't dissolve in water. So hydrophobic, water fearing, certain things don't dissolve in water. Things. So when we're talking about non-polar covalent bonds, such as butter, saturated fats, oils, they don't dissolve in water because they don't disassociate positive and negative like salt does, like NaCl does, and so they don't dissolve well in water. Water can help regulate temperature. So hydrogen bonds make water resist changes in temperature. If you notice, it takes a lot of energy to make water boil. Also, you'd have to, water can hold on to heat very well, and therefore to cool it down to the point of freezing can take quite a bit. And so water helps your body, the water in your body helps your body with resisting of temperature. It's not the only thing, but it helps your body with the resisting of temperature. As you see here on the slide, this is why coastal regions have milder temperatures, because they have places that are surrounded by water tend not to have as much of fluctuations in temperature as places that don't have water. All right, so that slide is just talking to you about that, the ability of water to also expand when it does freeze, right, which is a pretty cool ability of water. It gets bigger when it's frozen. All right. Water also participates in, let me move my video here, chemical reactions that are needed for life. And so we have dehydration synthesis, all right, dehydrate to remove a water molecule in order to synthesize. And then we have hydrolysis, adding a water molecule in order to break apart, right? So dehydration synthesis, remove an H2O, and therefore to synthesize something, to put two things together. And then the reverse of that, we add water to be able to break something apart. A good example of this is burning fat in your body. Your body needs water to be able to burn fat molecules, to go through the process of hydrolysis, right? It needs water to make that reaction happen. That's one of the reasons why they'll say, like, drink water. It'll help you lose weight, not just because having water in your stomach will suppress your appetite to a degree. There's one element of it, but also your body does physically need water to be able to burn fat. It's part of the reaction. So water participates in the chemical reactions needed for life. And then we saw this. We did this in the lab today, but we have hydrogen ions, and we also talked about hydroxide ions. As things that are considered acidic have a high concentration of hydrogen ions. things that are considered basic have a low concentration of hydrogen ions and a high concentration of hydroxide ions, right? And so we talked about this in our pH lab today that we went over in our laboratory, and it's very it, it, it's pH is something that is very important in the body because the body wants to stay right around 7.35, 7.45. If you see their blood and tears are around 7.3 to 7.4 and pH, right? That's where your body wants to be. We in the lab we worked with a very strong acid, hydrochloric acid. What makes an acid strong? The ability of that acid to be able to release, dissociate the hydrogen and the chlorine and release hydrogen ions, right? What makes a base strong? To be able to accept hydrogens, and so reduce the amount of hydrogens by releasing the OH ions, right? If an organism strays too far from its optimal pH, it could die. And I talked about that in the lab. Proteins have to maintain a certain shape to be able to function properly. And if those proteins lose their shape, called denaturing, they could lose their function. Well, your body needs proteins to be able to survive. And you're made up of proteins, part of the structure in your body. Buffer solutions help maintain a constant pH by absorbing or releasing hydrogen into a solution. So when pH is too high, buffers release hydrogen ions, which lowers the pH. When pH is too low, they absorb, right? So it buffers, it keeps the pH at a certain level, right? So your body wants to stay at 7.3, 7.4. And so if your body gets too high, the pH starts to go too much towards the too high, which means too basic, then it will release hydrogen ions. If it gets too low, too acidic, then it will absorb hydrogen ions in order to raise the pH. And your body, but also animals, plants have natural buffers in them to be able to control the pH, because if the pH were to get too high or too low, it could cause proteins to denature, therefore become ineffective. Therefore, your body cannot perform the functions necessary to stay alive. And you can answer these questions on your own. I won't do them right now. All right, so next is the organic molecules. An organic molecule contains both carbon and hydrogen. Now, I know when you go to the grocery store, people say, oh, I want some organic food. Now, when you go to Whole Foods or Trader Joe's and you say, or Wegmans, and you say organic, that means that it was grown without the use of pesticides. Well, this is not Whole Foods, Wegmans, Trader Joe's. This is biology class, and some people get confused when they hear that term organic because we've been taught that it means, my cow only ate grass. But no, organic in science or in biology specifically, but in science in general, means that you have carbon bound to hydrogen. So methane, which is CH4, one carbon atom bound to 4 hydrogen atoms, creating the organic molecule, 2 different types of atoms bound together, an organic molecule of methane. It's organic because what makes it organic is simply that you have carbon and hydrogen bound together. That's what makes it organic. Remember that carbon and hydrogen, along with oxygen and nitrogen, are the most common elements found in living beings. In living beings, in humans, animals, plants. So that's what we deem as organic. Organic molecules are very important, needed for your life, processes. So we have different types of organic molecules, and hopefully some of these sound familiar. Carbohydrates, which are useful for energy. Proteins are the building blocks of our body. Nucleic acids, they are important for our genetic information, and our lipids. They contain energy. They provide protection. They also provide insulation. Right. So we have organic molecules that are in our food. Carbohydrates, proteins, and fats are common in our diets. You've probably heard of that. You should eat food that is, have some carbs. For instance, rice, spaghetti, cheese. I mean, not cheese. Rice, spaghetti, bread, proteins. Um, your beans, your chicken, different meats, fats. You have good natural fats and like avocados. Uh, so common in our diets. There are limitations. We want to be healthy and have a balanced diet, and because if we have an unbalanced diet, we can struggle with things such as obesity, excess weight, heart disease, blockage of blood vessels leading to the heart, or diabetes. Our body's unable to control levels of sugar in our bodies, right? So all of these things are important to pay attention to. A monomer is a single unit of a carbohydrate, a protein, or nucleic acid, right? Monomer is just a term used for a single unit of one of these organic compounds. Monomers join to form polymers, right? So these monomers of each of these different types of organic molecules come together to make polymers, long chains. Okay? Just keep that in mind. Dehydration synthesis, which we mentioned when we're talking about water, joins monomers together. Dehydration. Dehydration, the removal of water. Synthesis, the combining of two things or building of something. So, removal of water in order to combine two things together. Type of chemical reaction to synthesize polymer. Enzymes form bonds between two monomers, and a water molecule is released. Right? So this happens with carbohydrates, with proteins, with fats as well. Hydrolysis is the type of chemical reaction. Digest or break down a polymer, so like the reverse. So dehydration synthesis builds the polymer. Hydrolysis breaks down the polymer. When do you think you would need to break down a polymer? Look at that word in the second sentence, to digest. Imagine when you're if you ever heard of complex carbohydrates, you eat these complex carbohydrates, they go down to your esophagus, into your stomach, meet the gastric acids in your stomach, start to digest, and your body breaks down the polymers into monomers that can then be digested and used by your body. And a water molecule is required for the reaction to occur. Monosaccharides, specifically looking at carbohydrates. Carbohydrates are an organic molecule, and we have sugars and polysaccharides. Monosaccharides are a category of carbohydrates that involve simple sugars, and they are monomers that make up larger carbohydrates. So uh, these are three examples of monomers. Of monosaccharides: ribose, glucose, fructose. Notice they have one green circle or hexagon or pentagon or hexagon. It's just one of those green hexagons or pentagons. That's the mono, the one, right? Simple sugars. During dehydration synthesis, you can bind two monosaccharides together to form a disaccharide. Sucrose, for instance, table sugar, is a disaccharide, combination of glucose and fructose, right? So if you're going dehydration synthesis, you release a water molecule. To break down that sugar, you need water to be able to break it down into glucose and fructose. Hydrolysis separates the disaccharide. Dehydration synthesis binds the two monosaccharides together, forming a disaccharide. Hydrolysis will break the disaccharide into two monosaccharides. So depending on which way you want the reaction to go. Some places we find polysaccharides, multiple chains of carbohydrates, polysaccharides, in cellulose, starch in like a potato, glycogen in the liver, long chains of polysaccharides. Proteins have many different functions, do different things in the body. Structural muscle is made up of protein. Egg protein, digestive enzymes are proteins. Antibodies are proteins. Proteins, monomers of the protein are the amino acids. There's 20 different amino acids in nature. That's what amino acids are, what come together to make proteins. 20 different amino acids have 20 different R groups, right? Some are polar, some are non-polar, some are charged. Right? Proteins, these properties in turn determine the properties of the protein, the different R groups. Dehydration synthesis, once again, binds two amino acids together, forming a dipeptide, a long chain of amino acids. It's called a polypeptide, right? Long chain of amino acids, and that's what's going to make our protein, because that long chain of amino acids is going to fold. And as we talked about earlier, the shape of the protein is in direct correlation to its function, right? So it folds on itself. So it has a secondary fold and a tertiary fold, and that predicts its function. If you add heat or if you change the pH to protein, it unfolds, denatures, and it doesn't function the same way. Right? So this is the primary structure here, the chemical structure, and then you have the secondary structure, sort of like the first fold, and then the tertiary structure, and then the quaternary structure. Give it its final shape. Nucleic acids include DNA and RNA. And the primary structure of each protein in a cell is determined by the nucleic acids. Nucleic acids give us the genetic code for the proteins in our cells. The proteins are the workers, or the building blocks of our body. But the code for the different types of protein come from our nucleic acids. Monomers of the nucleic acids are the nucleotides, which have three parts: phosphate group, carbon, sugar, nitrogenous base. different nitrogenous bases found in nucleotides, right? So we have this A, C, and G found in both DNA and RNA, but DNA only uses thymine, and RNA only uses uracil, right? So few differences in the bases, the nitrogenous bases. Again, you can have dehydration and synthesis to bring the monomers together, hydrolysis to break them apart. You have these long chains of nucleotides, which make what is called DNA and RNA in our body. Lipids, the last organic compound, are hydrophobic. Unlike carbohydrates, proteins, and nucleic acids, lipids are not built from chains of monomers, so a little bit different. You have triglycerides, which are energy rich, and they provide us with energy, long-term storage of energy, but also protection. You have steroids, which have a 4-ring structure like testosterone. That's considered in the class of lipids, so different structures. Triglycerides are formed by covalently attaching fatty acid molecules to a glycerol, dehydration synthesis. You break that down. You know, if you wanted to break it apart, hydrolysis separates the fatty acid from the glycerol. Like I said, you need water to be able to burn fat. All carbons of a saturated fatty acid are bound to 4 other atoms. So you see the carbon bound to 2 hydrogen and 2 other carbons, each carbon. This gives it a straight shape, but you can also have unsaturated fat. You may have heard of that, or trans fat, when you have carbon double bound to carbon, and it's not fully saturated. So unsaturated fat is liquid at room temperature. And you also have trans fat, which is solid at room temperature. Right? Depends how the carbon and the hydrogens are bound to each other. So unsaturated fat, at least 1 double bond. Right? Waxes, another class of lipids, fatty acids combined with alcohols make waxes. This class of lipid is particularly hydrophobic. Waxes don't mix with water. They don't dissolve in water. Used to seal things. Steroids. We talked about cholesterol. Talked about testosterone, but also cholesterol. Regulates the fluidity in animal cell membranes. Also, cholesterol is used as cell markers as well. But they are important lipid molecules. Right? And so that's pretty much where we want to stop. And so this is all the properties of the organic molecules making up our cells, chemical bonds. We need all of these things, or life would come to a halt.